Okay, so but I'm not going to tell you the story of Hanukkah that you already all know, because you already all know it. I'm going to tell you the story before the story. So then we're going to talk about the story before the story, and of course how it's relevant to us. How, if of all the stories of all the Jewish people, of all of our historical experiences, of all of our holidays, I would argue that Hanukkah is the most relevant holiday of all the holidays. And the pre-story of the story before Matisyahu and of Matisyahu, is exactly our story today in so many ways. I'm going to share with you the story. It's an obviously relevant story for us in our lives. And God willing, next week, we're going to do the post story. So the story of Hanukkah, you all know this. Jews entering the temple, finding a little flask of oil, lighting it for 8 days, that you heard before. Today we'll talk about the story before the story, and then next week we'll talk about the 25 years after that story. Okay? And that'll be about the 5 sons, Judah the Maccabee, not only him, but his brothers also. He'll be the main character. So let's start at the beginning, which is the story of Yehud of Matisyahu. But to begin the story of Matisyahu, just go back here a second, we really need to go back much before that, really to the times of Alexander the Great. Really. You all know of Alexander the Great, right? We've all heard of him. Alexander the Great was one of the greatest warriors of all of history. He conquered tremendous land, did amazing things. And Alexander the Great began spreading a very sophisticated, enlightened culture. He was, relative to the rest of the pagans and the barbarians that lived in the world, he was, so to say, very cultured and very sophisticated. And he brought tremendous enlightenment and wisdom and culture to literally the whole world, and he united the world. Mathematics and science and literature and philosophy and art, everything. The Greeks. Until today, there are many things that we have in culture today that are still from the Greeks, besides for the Olympics. But in many things in art and in the, by the way, even the Olympics, I'll get to it later, by sports games. We actually do something at every sports game that I'll bet you no one in this room realizes is, I should say no one, I never know people know. There are things to do at every sports game that are rooted in the Greek culture of their forms of worship, of idol worship and all that back then. But it was a very sophisticated form of idol worship, and they had cities with libraries and temples and architecture, and they got the art. And so, by and large, the different countries that were conquered by Alexander the Great and by the Greek Empire very much liked the Greek culture. They had no problem integrating Greek culture into their cultures. And literally, Greek culture spread throughout the world, became very widespread, including for many of the young Jews that were very enticed by the beauty of their culture. And we'll talk about it now. I'll get to the political part soon. So many Jews began building gymnasiums and began building theaters and all these things that were part of the Greek culture. Now, the Greeks were also idol worshippers. You should understand that. The Zeus and these are all idols. These are all pagan. What? Statues, exactly. I mean, the names of the holidays, the names of the days, everything was all idol worship, but it was very sophisticated. And their greatest idol, the greatest form of idol worship was the human body. The human body. The human body was like supreme of importance to the Greek culture. And yes, they worshipped the body. They did everything they can to present the strength of the body, and they would show off the body. And when they would compete in sports, they would compete naked, not with uniforms. They would compete naked. There were many. If you believe in the pride of your body, you have to show it off. Now, for Jews, this presented a major problem because they were circumcised. And if you're performing naked, shooting javelins or whatever you're doing in the Greek theater or in the stadium, called the Colosseum, whatever it's called, the stadiums, you're going to obviously be made fun of. And in fact, to the Greeks, Judaism was the most outlandish, barbaric culture. We think about idol worshippers like they're pagans and they're barbarians. But to the sophisticated and enlightened Greeks, it was actually the Jews who were the barbarians, to desecrate your own body and to chop off part of your body and deform beauty in such a cruel, evil way, was proofs of the barbarism and the stupidity of Judaism was the bris, was the circumcision of the Jewish people. And so many Jews began surgically reversing their circumcisions to allow themselves to compete in these games without being obviously Jewish, without their... Now, I said I'll tell you something fascinating I discovered today. The greatest form of idol worship, though, what was different about Greek idol worship and other idol worships, was you didn't go to a temple of a statue and bring spices to the statue and bow down to the statue. Instead, you went to show off the power of your God through competing other teams or other people, other cities in whatever sports they were playing. But before they were playing, so that literally their temple was the sports stadium. That was their temple. And before the games, what would they do? They would pray to their God and they would sing songs to their God to help them in their strength and in their skill of winning whatever game they were playing. So before the Greeks would play a game in their stadiums, everyone would stand up and sing to their God. Hence, this is the beginning of even till today, before a sports game, we get up and we sing, the Star-Spangled Banner, and we sing the national anthem, which is beautiful. It's a sense of pride, and it makes you feel good. And it wasn't always done until I think one of the world wars became like widespread in America, that everyone does before games. But its origin, its original source, is from the Greek games that were always began with a prayer, a song. And then after the games, there would be feasts and all that. And it was all a form of worship to the idol of the body. And the Jews, they were very, very excited by this. But what was beautiful culture was that it didn't, in many ways, accept them as Jews. The Greeks were not against Jews being Jews. They were against certain barbaric, quote unquote, being customs of the Jews, like circumcision and kosher, the laws that made no sense. But the Greeks recognized the inherent beauty and the wisdom of Torah. Greeks studied Torah. Greeks wanted the Jews to be Jews. And in fact, the Jews were not in any way forced to convert to any other religion. One of the things that was unique about Alexander the Great did not want to force his religion on everyone else. He wanted everyone to have his style, but he also accepted other people too. Multicultural diversity in the Greek, community. And so Jews were able to be proud Jews and also be proud Greeks. They could do both. And in fact, just like today, correct. And in fact, there was a name for them. They were called the Matisyahu. Matisyahu means the English is called the Hellenists. In Hebrew, it's called the Matisyahu. They were Jews that were, in many ways, Greeks, but they were proud of their Jewish identity. They weren't, besides the circumcision part, they were embarrassed of certain outdated parts of Judaism while they were proud of being Jews. Now, I know that would sound very stupid, but it's actually, I can think of many Jews that are like that, who are very proud Jews, but they're embarrassed of certain parts of Judaism, and they don't relate to them. Many parts of Judaism make no sense whatsoever. It should be completely abolished, and that's old-fashioned and barbaric and outdated, but they still maintain the proud Jewish identity, not realizing the contradiction to being proud of your Judaism and thinking half of your Judaism is outdated and barbaric. But okay, we'll go there soon. Anyway, now we come to the year 30. We come to the Hebrew year 3562, which in the English year is 222 BCE. So we're talking about how many years ago? 2,200 years ago. Okay, so a little over 2,000 years ago, and you have a huge divide in this Greek empire from Alexander the Great between the Seleucids and the Ptolemaic rule. Okay, and eventually, without getting too much into the history, there was basically a civil war, a separation between these two parts of the Greek Empire, and the Seleucids which is Assyrians, to use language that we understand today, separate from the Ptolemaics, which is more down south Egypt. And the land of Israel was under Ptolemaic rule, which is down by Egypt, and then the Seleucids fought against and the Seleucids took over the land. The Syrian Greek kings took over the land of Israel. And generally speaking, the first Seleucid kings were friends to the Jews, just like the Greeks had been. But now it's divided in half. Until we come to Antiochus III. Antiochus III was king of Syria until the year 186 BCE, was waging a war against the king Ptolemy, who was the king in Egypt, which is south of Israel. So that's the only reason it's important to know this. Syria is north of Israel. Egypt is south of Israel. So who's stuck in the middle? Of course, you all know the answer to that question, right? So now Antiochus conquers the land of Israel, and many wars are going back and forth. And then the Romans get involved, and the Romans come back, and the Antiochus is beaten. When Antiochus dies, they start taking a lot of the Romans put a lot of taxes on Antiochus the third. So where's Antiochus going to pay now these taxes? Jews, because Jews have money, always have money in their mind, and he starts to put heavy taxes upon the Jews to pay the taxes. Now, after that, there was a man then whose name was Jason. He was actually a high priest, and he saw an opportunity here. The king needs money, and the temple treasury actually had money. Every year before Pesach, in the month of Adar, every single Jew would give the half shekel coin to the temple, which would be the collection for the whole year to pay for all of the offerings, all the sacrifices of the year were paid at that time. Also, people donate the wood and all that. So he had this idea, and he comes to the Jews. He says, "I know that you have this money. I want the money." They say, "We're not giving it to you." So he sends his minister, his name is Heliodrus, to come take the money. And although Yochanan the high priest begged him not to, he comes in, and when he walked into the temple, he froze in fear, and he couldn't walk anymore, and he fell to the floor. And they took him out, and he didn't come back in. But from already then, the Greeks they have this in Antiochus' family, this idea that all the wealth is hidden in the temple. We couldn't get it because they did some spell when the Roman, when the officers went in there. Heliodrus, someone pronounce his name, went in. He fainted. He couldn't walk. But they had this idea that all the wealth was hidden in the temple. Now, anyway, he's killed. His son Seleucus, this is Seleucus, the son of Antiochus III. He was the one that tried to take the money out. He dies. He was killed rather, and his brother Antiochus IV is now the king over the empire, which includes Israel in its empire. Same name, but he's the fourth, Antiochus IV. Now, he was the first king that did not like the Jews. He was a very rash and impulsive person, and he decided he had to put his greatness into the whole world, and he self-declared himself Antiochus Epiphanes. Epiphanes was a Greek word for the beloved of God. And that was his own self-given title. I am Antiochus Epiphanes, the beloved of God. And he was convinced he was the one chosen by God. It gets to your head power, right? He was convinced he was chosen by God to be the one to bring the brilliant, amazing, sophisticated Greek culture to the whole entire universe. Yeah. So anyway, he starts doing that. Now, he was crazy and not very well liked. And in fact, the people of his time called him Antiochus Epimanes. Epimanes in Greek is madman. So he called himself, his official title was Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus, the beloved of God. And the nickname that people called him, in school, like the nickname behind the teacher's back, was Antiochus Epimanes, Antiochus the crazy man, the madman. They found the Epimanes, and they got it. The madman, which was much more suitable to his character. And as I said, he wanted to reunite everyone. And so he decided that he wanted to get rid of the distinctly Jewish people who were not Hellenizing and assimilating into Greek culture, and he had to stamp them out. Again, he had no problem with the fundamental idea of Jews. He wasn't against Jews. He didn't want to kill Jews. He just wanted all the Jews to be like the Greeks. His multicultural diversity, like some communities are very diverse today, but you have to think exactly the same way and behave the same way. Different skin color, but that's it. Otherwise, you have to, what? No, I'm not. I don't want to give names to be specific. I'm saying there's some places where the only way to be, diverse is if you all agree exactly with each other, and there's no separation in any way, shape, or form. Then we can agree with you, and we can all be diverse because we look differently, but we're all the same. And that was the multicultural diversity that Antiochus wanted to impose upon Israel. There could be a temple, there could be Jewish people, as long as they act like us and they dress like us and have the same names like us and don't have Jewish names, etc. So at that time, he took Yochanan the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, who was the one that had stopped his brother from taking the money out of the temple treasury, and he replaced him with a man called Joshua, who changed his name. He was a Hellenist, and he changed his name from Joshua to Jason. Okay, Jason. Jason was a very nice Greek name, and the Greek names are still around till today. And he was a part of the Hellenist part. Yeah, that's the original. Jason was back then. Back then, Yeshua was Jason. We're talking over 2,000 years ago in the times of Hanukkah. Yes, in the times of the temple. Now, so Yoshua, or Jason as he would prefer to be called, told the king, I'm going to get you the money from the temple treasury, so make me the Kohen Gadol. So he was a priest. He was still a Kohen. He was a priest, but he would be an ally of Antiochus, help him with funding the wars he wanted to fight against because again, there was these wars that were going on in Egypt, which was right, past Israel, and you need money. So he was going to help him out. Now, the problem is once you start selling, it's always cheaper, right? Or more desperate. So it'll sell for even lower price. So along comes another man whose Greek name was Menelaus, and Menelaus. And he comes to the king and says, Jason's underselling you. Jason is not giving you everything the temple has. I'm telling you there's more in the temple that he's not giving you. If you make me the high priest, I'll get even more money than Jason is giving you. Right? Can you imagine this? So what does the king do? Antiochus is not very loyal to Jason. He kicks out Jason. Jason is no longer the high priest. And this guy, Menelaus, he's now the high priest. Now, Menelaus is not necessarily even the Kohen. We don't really know much about him. Not necessarily was he even a priest or not, but you know the joke, whatever. He decided he wanted to be a Kohen. So he, for the right price, it wasn't even his money, it was the temple money. He comes now, he's the high priest in the temple. Now, obviously, at this point, Yochanan and Kohen Gadol, the king appointed him. Which so the Greeks had, until this point, not really interfered in the religious life of the Jewish people. It was a relatively free time for the Jews. And the influence of the Greeks was very much a chosen influence, meaning the Jews on their own were becoming Hellenists. This is the majority of the Jewish people, by the way. It wasn't a small group. I don't know a statistic, but it was the majority, many Jews, probably the majority of the Jews that had accepted and adopted different levels of adopting the Greek culture. Going to their theaters, going to their performances, their art, their culture, their shows, their music. Now some fledged where they gave up their Jewish names and removed their circumcision. They were performing, and competing in their games. And some were Jews that went to the synagogue on Shabbos, and then went to the sports stadium on Sunday, and then they went to the Tuesday. All these theaters and all that began with the Greeks. So there were many Jews that didn't change their name, but they were very much influenced by the Greek culture. Well, but now Antiochus is the first literally imposing himself upon the religious structure, because Antiochus Epiphanes, he has a mission to be God's chosen one and to change the social fabric of the country, that everyone should be just like them. So he's now changing who is the high priest in the temple. And he puts in first Jason, and then when someone promises more money than Jason, no problem. It's not Menelaus, no longer Jason. Okay. Now, at that time, as I already told you, Antiochus is fighting a war against Egypt. So he's in the land of Israel. His kingdom is up north in Syria, but he's in Israel. He's fighting. And at that time, a message came from Rome, who was kind of like the king player, telling the war. And Antiochus had no choice. You don't want to fight with the Romans. Antiochus stopped the war in Egypt. But he was very, very upset about this. You understand the mind of a man when you want to do something, you're a dictator. There's one person who can tell you to stop, and you're forced to stop. He had to yield. But at that time, there was an accident that happened during the war. At some point, I don't know if it was part of the battle, and a rumor spread in Israel that the reason why the war stopped was because Antiochus had died. He died. That was a rumor that, like today, rumors go around on WhatsApp. The stories don't change. It wasn't WhatsApp. It was, I don't know, horse and buggy gossip. Rumors spread back then just like they spread today. You know what I'm saying? So rumor got around that the war was over because Antiochus had died. When Antiochus had died, the Jews, now Yochanan, I forgot to say, Yochanan the high priest had already been killed by Menelaus. He had already had him assassinated and killed because he was trying to fight back. To here, you have not even a priest serving in the temple is not okay. But Jason, who had been a priest and had been deposed because of this guy Menelaus, you can tell they weren't very good friends, obviously. You can imagine they didn't like each other very much. Jason sees his opportunity, and so he gets the people together and they rebel against Menelaus. Okay? Runs away. Menelaus sees this happening. He runs away with his crows and his friends. They flee. In the meantime, where do they flee to? To the king, to Antiochus, who's actually still alive. He hasn't died. It was just, fake news. Yeah, fake news. There's nothing new under the sun. Nothing new. Fake news. He runs to Antiochus. Antiochus, they tried to kill me. And Antiochus is fuming mad. He's fuming mad for two reasons. First of all, officially he's fuming mad because they're rebelling against him by kicking out his personally appointed Kohen Gadol, high priest in the temple. That's number one. But really, really, is he mad? Yeah, well, because he had to stop the war against Egypt. He was winning a war, in his mind anyway. And now he had to stop the war. So what's he going to do with all his energy and his, like if he's fighting with someone, then you take the kid away, you stop him, he wants to go pick at someone else. So he takes all of his rage and all of his unfulfilled, ambitions of conquering Egypt, leashes it out against the Jews. Okay, shocking. They enjoy the psychology here, understanding what was happening politically at the time. You understand the situation. The Jews. Jason, whatever, is fighting back for his position. They fight against Menelaus, who was trying to extort more money out of the Jews for Antiochus IV. Antiochus now is in Israel, and he comes and he destroys this rebellion, quote-unquote rebellion against him. He took it personally as a sign against him. Had nothing to do with him, it had to do with Menelaus. And he plunders the entire Beis HaMikdash, takes all the wealth, and he turns the Beis HaMikdash into a pagan temple. In fact, on Chav Hei Kislev, the 25th day of Kislev, about the 25th day of the 25th day of Kislev is Chanukah. Very good, Michael. 25th day of Kislev is the day when we lit the menorah. The day that we were able to finally relight the menorah was the 25th day of Kislev. But this is the 25th day of Kislev. I believe it's through 25th day of Kislev. And it says on that day, pigs were offered on the altar in the Mizbeach. Pigs were brought into the temple on the altar to their. That's why we have to No, pigs are not kosher in the Torah. Pigs were never good. The reason why about pigs is because we weren't allowed to eat it. There was a sign. Even then, it was a disgrace to the Jewish people to see a pig brought into the temple and offered on the altar to a pagan god. Happened on the 25th day of Kislev in the year 3594, the Jewish year. And then began the three most miserable, dark years of in Jewish history. There's dark times. The next 3 years began a terrible, terrible time for the Jews, which is interesting. The Jews were living in Israel. The Beis HaMikdash, the temple, was standing, and yet the decrees against the Jews was terrible, terrible. And anyone that was found violating the laws of Antiochus put into executed. Antiochus was here, and this was his whole passion now to destroy the Jews that were fighting against him. You were not allowed to study Torah. Any possession of the scriptures of the Torah was forbidden. And the main things was Shabbos. It's a famous thing that there was no more allowed to keep Shabbos, to celebrate Rosh Chodesh, and circumcision. Right? So circumcision was a stand. That was like the barbaric act of the the Greeks hated so much. Shabbos also, what is Shabbos? God is in charge of the world. To them, to not work on Shabbos was also a sign that you're lazy, that you don't believe in the power of the human effort and the power of the human body. And I mean, what's the whole point of Shabbos for us? We recognize God's in charge of the world. That's the whole point. God created the world in 6 days and we rest on the seventh. And to them, of course, but to them, Shabbos was a terrible act of denial of the entire Greek belief system and the power of the human body and etc. What's the problem with Rosh Chodesh? But Rosh Chodesh is just celebrating the lunar calendar. And yet, again, the problem was that what makes Rosh Chodesh? All the celebrations, they weren't against the Jewish holidays. They were against declaring the holidays. You can have a Pesach Seder. You just have a Pesach Seder on the day that the court establishes as a Seder. You got to follow the solar calendar. You got to follow them. And so they refused to allow a Jewish calendar to exist. They refused to allow Jews to celebrate Shabbos. And they refused to allow Jews to be circumcised. And those are the three main decrees, but there are many, many other decrees. One of the famous stories in the Talmud is that the Medrash, rather, not the Talmud, is that a girl, before she got married, the Greek governor would take her to his house and rape her on the night before her wedding. But she shouldn't go into her wedding as a virgin. This is the kind of torture and the Jews are going through during these years. The Anachas is now breathing down on the back of Jewish people. A very, very dark time. Many, many Jews died as a result of these terrible decrees. And the woman that was caught circumcising her child, they were executing gruesome, horrific forms of torture together with their children. First, their children being killed, and then they would be killed. The entire family would be killed. It was a very dark time. Another story of that time is Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer was one of the great rabbis of the Jewish people. He was 90 years old. The of Antiochus came and told him that he has to eat pork. They bought him in public and said that you have to eat, or we're going to kill you. And he refused. And they said, we're going to kill you. He said, kill me, I'm not going to eat the pork. So then they were gathering, and they had gathered many people. They were sure that he would eat the pork. And if they would see Rabbi Eliezer eating the pork, then other people would start eating the pork. So they told him, don't even eat the pork. Just put the pork to your lips as if you're eating it, and we'll it'll spare your life. And he said, absolutely not. He refused to do even that. And they tortured him and put him to death. Eat pork, they killed him. In the times of a Shema, in the times of a decree against Jewish people's Judaism, you have to fight in every way. Of course, the story of that time is the story of Hannah and her 7 sons. Maybe I'll share that story in 2 weeks from now on Chanukah. It's a very, very beautiful, it's a sad story. It's a painful story of Hannah and her 7 sons. And it was just a terrible time. In fact, it's 3 years. This period is a 3-year period of some terrible times where many, many Jews were killed. And not only were we killed, torture, the rape of the Jewish girl before they got married, the terrible bloodshed, where we weren't allowed to keep our basic laws of Shabbos, of kashrus, of Jewish holidays, of identity. We weren't allowed to learn. Jews are not allowed to learn Torah. That's why we have the dreidel. What was the dreidel? They would go out to the mountains and the caves, and they would, in secret, even though they knew that if they be good, every single one of them would be killed. They would hide and they would learn Torah together, and there'd be one kid. They saw the soldiers were coming on patrol, quickly hide the books. They would take out the dreidels. They would spin they were just playing a dreidel game, and that's how they hid their studying of Torah from the Greek officers. We understand that what of times we're living in, that little kids in school know that what you're doing is forbidden. You have today, you have practice lockdown drills, right? Unfortunately, it's a sad reality. When I was a kid in school, we didn't practice lockdown drills. Never happened when I was a kid. But today they have to practice them, unfortunately. Yeah, but I'm saying the fact that kids have to live with an awareness of how to behave as an active shooter on campus, and how you all hide in the bathroom, and how many kids can fit in this little bathroom that's 2 feet by 2 feet, and all that, and top of the toilet. Here, my kids, the description, how they hide, and fit that whole class in the bathroom. It's So that's what they studied back then. They're hiding. If the Greeks are coming, they take out the dreidels and they play dreidel. It was a terrible time for the Jewish people, despite the fact that we were living in Israel with the temple standing. It wasn't we were in exile, etc. Okay. And then we finally come to the story where one day the Greeks are going around from town to town, and they're putting up altars in every single town, forcing the Jews in that area to come gather and to publicly proclaim their allegiance to the idols of the Greeks and to bow down to them and to worship them, etc. Greek garrison arrived in the town of Modin. Modin is 12 miles northwest from Jewish Yerushalayim. The town still exists today. It's west of modern-day Yerushalayim. People live there. And they came in to the town of Modin. They set up an altar, and they gathered all the Jews in the town, and they forced them to sacrifice a pig to their god, Zeus or whoever it was. And they offer they said, who's a volunteer to be the one to offer this pig to our God? And one of the Hellenists that was there stepped forward to volunteer to be the one to offer the pig. It was a man called Matisyahu. Now, we know very little about who Matisyahu is. And I want to stress this point. Matisyahu was not any of the great, from the illustrious families. We don't know anything about his family, about his background and all that. We know that he was a Kohen, he was a priest. His father was called Yochanan, we have a kid named after him. So Matisyahu Kohen. In fact, one of the reasons why it's called Maccabee is because Maccabee is Matisyahu, 4 letters: Mem, Chaf, Beis, Yud. Matisyahu Kohen ben Yochanan. That's Maccabee. So that's how we know his father's name was Yochanan. Other than that, we don't know anything. He was a priest. But he saw what was happening, and he saw how these Jews are coming forward to offer a pig to an idol, to an offering to a Greek god in the city. And he grabs a sword or a knife, whatever it is, and he stabs and he kills this Jew, this Hellenist that was bringing the idol to the god. And of course, the Greek garrison was there. How many soldiers were there? I don't know, number 10, 20, whatever was there. They attacked the other Jews that were with him. They right away rise up and they killed the Greeks that were in that town of Modin. But obviously, Matisyahu knew that this is just the beginning. You killed them, you got away with it now, but they're going to come after you. And so he gathers together those that are loyal to him, and they go to hide in the caves in Judea, in the caves over there. He gathers together a group. It was a very, very ragtag group of Jews that knew nothing about fighting. They had no training. They had no weapons. They had no nothing. They were priests. They were the people that were willing to fight. They weren't the young, strong, the soldiers, the ones that went to work out and were pumped and buff. They were the guys that were studying Torah. They gathered them together, and he tells the slogan of this group was "Mi kamocha." He says, "Mi la Hashem." When he goes out to war, when he says whoever wants to go to the cave, "Mi." Whoever is Hashem, come with me. That was the words of Matisyahu. Mi la Hashem elai. From there came the slogan, Mi kamocha ba'elim Hashem. Who is like you among the heavenly powers, O God? And those words, Mi kamocha ba'elim Hashem. The first letter of those words is Mem Kaf Beis Yud Maccabee. Got it? Okay. Some say that the reason why they're called Maccabees is because the Hebrew word for hammer is a makav. Anyway, but that's all we know about him. We don't know his last name. We don't know. Okay. Anyway, so they escape the little town of Modin and they go out to the mountains. They go out to the caves in the hills, in the Judean hills, to go hide over there. The Greeks realize that what happened. So Antiochus sends an army of 6,000 troops to go and destroy them. So here are the Jews. There's a few, not even 3,000. Later, 3,000. At this point, it's a few hundred Jews that are hiding in the hills, ragtag, with nothing. With literally, they found someone had a bow, someone else had an arrow, and they put them together, and they had imagine Jews doing construction. You know what I'm saying? Not Steve. I'm saying they found one guy that knew what he was doing, had some hammers, had some tools, and whatever. And that's it. And here you have a few hundred Jews, and the first it comes to quash these troublemakers in the hills, 6,000 men. The Greeks didn't know where they were going. They're in the, unfortunately, Israel has Hashem from our mistakes in the past. But when you come in with tanks or whatever, if you go hiding in tunnels and all, they pop out and they ambush you and they surprise you, and you don't know what's going and coming and going, very vulnerable. And they destroy this army. So the Greeks realize this is not, they're going to have something. So he sends an army under the general called Apollonius. Apollonius is the first general when it comes out, the real, not just 6,000 soldiers comes. And they also, there are many guerrilla warfare attacks, and they keep on attacking the army. And they have a war by Bishar, and they destroy this army too. So at this point, Antiochus is very, very angry, and he can't handle this. So he sends an army of 40,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry. That's a big army. Led by his best general, Lysias. That's the head, the top of the Greek army is a man called Lysias. He has 40,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry. You know how many Jews there were at this time? 3,000 Maccabees. We're talking about a very small number. If you do the math, that's a 1 to 16 odds. 1 to 16 odds. The 6-day war was not that bad. It was close. It was like 1 to 10, if I'm not mistaken. But it's close. I'm saying, but it's somewhat in the same realm. And we don't know this in Israel. We heard the guy in the north. I forgot his name now. Who was within the north? And the guy. He was describing. They were in the tank. There were like a few tanks. 10 tanks. They had 10 tanks. Israel had 10 tanks in the Galilee. The Galilee, in the Golan Heights, in the Golan Heights, on the morning of Yom Kippur, the 10 tanks, and so they were watching the tanks, the Syrian tanks, is coming over. It's coming the hill. Like you see, it was like a never-ending. Like you see, like a thing of ants coming. Like you see, like over the crest in the distance, a never-ending wave of tanks after tanks. I said, how many tanks do the Syrians have? Thousands. They had thousands of tanks coming against 10. It was like maybe 3. I don't know what it was. I don't remember the number. Tanks and tanks and tanks were coming. It was 600. I don't remember. Like a never-ending supply of tanks coming over. You need 10 tanks to defend the entire Israel, like against this. So that's basically what it was. And so again, and this was in the work of guerrilla warfare. They were trying. The main battle happened at Mitzpah, and the night before battle, Judah the Maccabee was the head army. We're going to talk about him next week, but he was the head. He fasted and prayed to Hashem. All the men fasted. Therefore, yes, you need to eat strong and you need to sharpen your swords. But the ultimate preparation for success in the battle is God. And the entire Maccabee fasted the night before they went into battle. And that night, while they were fasting, they were prepared praying. The Greeks made a decision to split their forces into half to try a surprise raid on the Jewish camp. So the Greeks divided it, and they took half their army around the caves of the other side to go and they thought it would be a surprise attack. It was not a surprise. Judah, Yehuda the Maccabee, found out what they were doing, or he planned what they were doing. And so he then did a surprise attack on the sleeping half that had stayed in the Greek camp. So half the Greek camp went around to attack them. The other one sleeping, waiting, to do it at the same time. While they were sleeping, he came into their camp, which I never, ever expected the Jews to be so brave and courageous to come with 3,000 men into their army base of now it's 20,000 men, 40,000 men. And they did a surprise attack, killing thousands and thousands of Greek soldiers, capturing all their weapons and all their supplies and everything. The remaining Greek soldiers fled the battlefield, and now they have all the weapons and everything from the Greeks to fight back against the other half, and the whole plan fell apart. So now Lysias, he came back with 60,000 men. Okay, now we're from 40,000 to 60,000 men and 5,000 cavalry. So less cavalry, but 60,000 infantry. He marches on base Tsur. By now, Yehuda the Maccabee was the greatest here in all of the Jewish community. You can imagine. After he already defeated an army of 40,000 men flocking to him, and now he had an army of 10,000. men. So his army has actually grown. Also have weapons and all that. But again, they have faith in Hashem, and they attack the cavalry. They attack everything with the cavalry. They attack, and they end up winning that war too. We talk about in the Al Hanisim prayer that Hashem gave over the Rabbim Miyad Ma'atim, the men into the hands of the few, and Giborim Miyad Chaloshim, the mighty into the hands of the weak. Now you understand what we're talking about. It's not like this is literally 10,000 men against 65,000 soldiers. 60,000 soldiers and 5,000 cavalry is a tremendous number. Okay. And so Lysias returns home to his capital. They couldn't conquer it. After the first 5,000 men, they gave up. Lysias lost hope. And at the same time, Antiochus died. Antiochus, who was this terrible, evil king that for the last 3 years had been torturing the Jews terribly, he finally dies. So now the army has left, and Israel has been liberated from the Greeks. So the Greeks went back to Syria. We say Greeks, it's not Greeks anymore. It's Syria, the Seleucids. They go back up to the land, and Israel is independent. They're not part of the Seleucid Empire, not part of the Ptolemy Empire. They're right in between the two. Right in between. You have the Greeks everywhere, and you have the Jews in the middle, completely independent. On 25 Kislev, in the Hebrew year 3597, which is exactly to the day 3 years after the Greeks came in and brought a pig on the Mizbeach. So 3 years. The whole Chanukah story, the whole story is going to be longer. But this story that we're talking about now is the main Chanukah story, the 3-year period from Chafei Kislev, 3594, to Chafei Kislev of the year 3597, is when they enter back into the temple. And you all know the story. They come back in. The English year is 164 BCE. Okay, 164 BCE. So 2000 and do the math. I don't know how many years ago is that. Do 2023 minus 164. Okay, close to 900 years ago. And so it's 3 years to the day after they ransacked the temple and defiled and desecrated the temple. They come in, and we know the story. They didn't have any oil to light the menorah. They actually didn't have a menorah, just to point out. They didn't have a menorah. The menorah was stolen by Antiochus a long time ago. The menorah was an extremely, extremely expensive piece of furniture. How was the menorah made? One solid piece of gold. You know how much gold that was? It was 10 amos high. It was huge. Sorry, 12. Yeah, 10 amos high was a huge. You need a step ladder to get up to light it. The coin. It was a big menorah. It was worth a tremendous amount of money. So Antiochus, of course, had stolen the menorah for gold. So they actually had to make like a little tin menorah. They found from the yeshiva boys giving out free menorahs. So they found some tin, found some metal, and they made a makeshift menorah out of metal. It was not a gold, but they didn't have any pure olive oil. And then the whole story, they found another miracle happened. They found pure olive oil, and even though it was only enough for one day, and really they should have waited, because once you start, you don't want to stop. So really, logic and law probably would have dictated to wait 7 days till you get more, and not to light the menorah. But because of the significance of the day, it's Chafei Kislev. This is the day that the temple had been destroyed, had been desecrated. They lit the menorah that day with complete faith, and God did a miracle that it burned for 8 days. Okay. That is a story, my friend. That's a little longer than I expected. But anyway, what's the lesson for us? Okay. The Jews have been hated for a very long time. That's all true. It's all true. Everything I described to you are amazing, great, amazing miracles. I just explained, but many of you, or all of you, and I don't know if people are watching online, I'm not sure how many knew all those details. There were 40,000 soldiers and 60,000 soldiers in the different armies in the 3 years. In fact, even when we, as adults, and for sure as kids, it's like we know that the Jews fought. Yehuda Maki was very brave. He fought against the soldiers, and and we won. Okay. There's no real focus given to the fact of the military victories that we had to fight. It's really not. And in fact, where do we know all these stories that I'm telling you? They all come from non-Jewish books. If you look at the Gemara in the Talmud, when the Talmud talks about the story of Chanukah. You know what the Gemara says? There's no volume in the Mishnah or in the Gemara called the volume of Chanukah. Like there's a volume on the laws of Rosh Hashanah, and there's a volume of the laws of Purim or the laws of Megillah, the laws of Sukkah. There's no volume of Chanukah. In the middle of the laws of Shabbos, talking about lighting Shabbos candles, and there goes to the lighting Chanukah candles. So it asks, if you don't have enough candles for both, my Chanukah, what is the holiday of Chanukah? What's the reason for the holiday celebration? So Talmud says, this is the whole story of the Talmud. I'm going to read to you right now in English. When the Syrian Greeks entered the sanctuary, they contaminated all the oil in the temple. When the Chashmonaim defeated them, the Jews searched and found only one flask of oil with the Kohen Gadol's seal still intact. It contained only enough oil to light the menorah for one day. However, a miracle occurred and the oil burned for 8 days. The following year, these 8 days were established as holidays with respect to reciting the Hallel and the Thanksgiving prayers, etc. That is the entire extent of the Talmud's description of Hanukkah. I read you the entire thing. I didn't skip one word. It literally, like when they conquer the enemies, like nothing happened. The rabbis. So first of all, a lot of what I said we know from Josephus, the famous Josephus. But besides that, there was actually a Megillah written about the whole story called Megillah Antiochus. And there's also something called the Sefer HaMaccabees, the Book of the Maccabees, which was written at that time. And when the rabbis decided to canonize which volumes in the times of the Second Temple, which is later, the rabbis decided to canonize what would be considered part of Tanakh and what would not be considered part of Tanakh. And many books were on the chopping, the book of Ecclesiastes, the books of Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs. And then the Talmud tells us there were 3 books that were chosen not to be in there. Some were chosen, yes, like Shir HaShirim, which was a whole debate if it should or shouldn't be part of the official work of Tanakh. The book of the Maccabees, Sefer HaMaccabeim, is not in there. Sefer HaMaccabeim is not in there. It's not in there. Why not? They didn't want that we should be talking about the entire history of those times and all the wars that they fought and the battles that they fought for a very simple reason. This war that Matisyahu was fighting and the Maccabees were fighting was not a war for national independence. The Jews were living in Israel. I mean, yes, they wanted political independence but they had the land, and you had the Babylonians before, and you had the Persians before, and you had the Egyptian Ptolemies before the Seleucid, the Syrians. They all controlled the land, and the Jews never attempted to overthrow their rule. The Jews didn't have a problem with living in the land under a different government. The problem was when the Greeks made Torah observance virtually impossible. That's when the Jews had to fight back. That's when the Jews had to come into fight. And that's why the rabbis make the entire story of Hanukkah not about the war, not about the miraculous victory, but about the victory of the oil. The entire focus, everything we do to celebrate Hanukkah is a focus on the miracle of the oil. The miracle of the oil. In fact, we don't even celebrate the day that the war was won. There's one opinion it is, but according to most understandings, the war was won on Chav Daled Kislev, on the 24th day. Then we won the war. The next day we came to the temple and we lit the menorah on the 25th day of Kislev. So what day did we start celebrating Hanukkah? On the 25th. We don't celebrate the victory. We don't do anything. We don't have a feast. And that's, by the way, why, like, unlike Purim or Pesach, where there was a war against our existence, we may have a mitzvah to have a feast. There's no mitzvah to eat on Hanukkah. We have to have donuts and latkes, but that's not a mitzvah. It's not like a Pesach Seder or a Purim party, which is a mitzvah that you have to have a feast on Purim. It's not a mitzvah to eat. If you don't eat donuts, you can still be a good religious Jew. You know what I'm saying? So the rabbis wanted the entire focus should be not on the military victory, but on the victory of the Jewish spirit, of the Jewish oil. The oil represents the purity of the Jewish people, the true light of the Jewish people. Why is the Hanukkah story the most unique story and the one that's most relevant for us today? If you look at most periods in Jewish history, the Jews never really had an opportunity to integrate and to assimilate into the society and into the culture in which they lived. Think about all of medieval times, whether in Russia and Poland and Spain and in Africa and Morocco and any of the Arab countries we lived. whether they were Christian countries, whether they were Muslim countries. The Jews never had an opportunity to be Jews and be part of the society. The only way a Jew could ever get a job or own a piece of land or have a profession during any of most of Jewish history was if they renounced that Judaism, they converted and became, many jokes about Jews, became goyim, whatever, and you couldn't be a Jew and be part of society. It was impossible. Until today, that is. Until today, that is. Where you can be a proud Jew and be a proud American and be proud of being able to, integrate two different cultures into one person. The only other time we really had that was at the Chanukah story. From Alexander the Great, for those 150, 200 years, till the Chanukah story, we had an opportunity where the Jews were able to be Jews, be accepted as Jews, be respected as Jews, and at the same time, totally assimilate, change their names, change their culture, remove their bris, and still say I'm a Jew. Instead, but I also worship idols. I also go to the games. I also am part of I'm on the team or whatever, Greek sport that I'm playing. And the ability for the Jews to somehow think that they're part of two different cultures was very good. And that's why, unlike Pesach, unlike Purim, unlike other times where our threat was a physical threat, and therefore we celebrate a physical victory, and we remember the physical victory, and on Purim we talk about how Haman tried to kill us and how he was hung on the gallows, and on Pesach we talk about the 10 plagues and how the slavery. On Chanukah we don't talk about any of that. On Chanukah the entire focus is on the light of the Jewish people, on the oil of the Jewish people. Wars come and go, and even miraculous victories can fade and all that. And if you go to the modern day Israel, so you have 1967 or whatever, these wars came and they went. And you have Jews living in Israel today that don't feel the sense of Zionistic pride or of homeland that they not now. Let's say before October 7th, 3 months ago, you had many Jews, many Israelis, who didn't feel that commitment to the land that their fathers and their grandfathers had. They didn't feel it. Actually, I'm going to what I want to talk about already next week already. But the point is that the Jewish people, this is a story about Matisyahu. Matisyahu recognized that the threat to the Jewish people was a threat against our spiritual identity. It was a spiritual threat. Who are we as a people? Not where do we live? We had a temple. We had the land of Israel. We had physical security if we were just Hellenized. The Jews living in Israel weren't under threat. It was the religious Jews living in Israel that were under threat. It was the Jews that wanted to maintain a Torah lifestyle that were under threat. And therefore, if we would make the story about the wars and how we fought for victory, we fought for independence, we would forget the real story of Hanukkah. Although it's true that the Maccabees won against 60,000 men, that's not the real story. The real story is that the light of the Jewish people continued to shine. That even though we had an opportunity that's very unique for the Jewish people, where we were able to be assimilated and integrated into a society that welcomed us and embraced us and wanted us to be like them and respected us, and so to say, quote unquote, the Jewish people were able to maintain an identity as proud, strong Jews. And that has to be the lesson for us from the Hanukkah story. Not the lesson of the Jews being able to fight because we were Maccabees, but the lesson of us being able to shine, not just light, just generic love and light or whatever. The light of the unfiltered, uncontaminated, pure olive oil with the seal of the Kohen Gadol. The pure light of our history, of our traditions, of our teachings, of our core identity, a light of holiness, a light of purity, a light that will continue to shine forever and ever. Okay, my friends? That is the story of the pre-story to the real story of Hanukkah. Okay, Laila Tov. Next week, God willing, I went a little bit on next week also. We'll talk about the post story, which is after they lit the menorah. We have 5 sons. I've just said it's a taste for next week. We have the 5 sons, primarily Yehuda HaMaccabee and the other sons, and the Hashmonite, the beginning of the Hashmonite kingdom, and we're going to 25 years post Hanukkah, God willing, next week.